I just learned that my parents kidnapped me when I was a baby. Before I tell you about the present, I ought to tell you about the past. You see, this horrible information has lent weight to what was already one of the most terrifying events. From my childhood, my entire life, I've felt keenly observed. Some claim there to be no scientific basis for that sensation. The feeling of a gaze, or many gazes, touching one's skin. They claim it to be an illusion. As a child, I used to tell myself this whenever I felt eyes upon me. But now I know better. In year 9, Miss Black arrived at our school and became, for only one lesson, the new religious education teacher. She spent 45 minutes mystified by me. That wasn't in my head. My friends commented as much. Her eyes lingered on my face, even when I wasn't answering a question. It made me squirm. "Are you a Christian?" one girl asked the teacher. "Religious persecution is part of the human condition, so I keep my beliefs close to my chest," Miss Black replied, gaze locked on me, not the inquirer. "Ripe." "What did you say, miss?" asked another of my classmates. The teacher ignored him and continued with the lesson, but we all heard that out-of-place word. My friends repeated it mercilessly for the rest of the day. They joshed me with smooching noises and puckered lips, all while refusing to take their own eyes off me, emulating my supposed admirer. I am grateful for that, however. Grateful for their steadfast mockery. Grateful that they clung to my side faux-adoringly as we walked to the buses at the end of the school day. You see, if my friends hadn't been there to scream for help when Miss Black attempted to pack me into her rusted Kia, perhaps Mr. Alton wouldn't have rushed forwards in time. Perhaps I never would have been seen again. For many years I woke in a sweat, whenever recalling the many elements of that traumatic ordeal, which culminated in Mr. Alton shoving Miss Black to the asphalt and rescuing me from the back seat. Remember Miss Black's firm fingers clamping around the shoulder pads of my school blazer. I remember the putrid aroma of onions, cheese, and spices, meals woven into the leather chairs of her car. I remember the stained pillow and the scratchy blanket, suggesting that she'd been living in there. I shuddered whenever I imagined what that would-be abductor had in store for me. But I may not have been frightened enough. Miss Black was arrested, and my parents moved us to the other side of the country. However, even with that dangerous woman locked away, my fear of being watched only worsened. A doctor prescribed antidepressants to help with my phobia of being watched. Sure, those pills helped to dull the fear, helped to dull all of my emotions, rendering me a numb adolescent, near oblivious to the world around me. But they were still there, the eyes of the watchers. I just cared significantly less about them, until this weekend. I came home from university to help Dad with some spring cleaning, as he'd been complaining about clutter in the house, though it ended up being a matter of spring reshuffling, as things were simply being moved into the loft until my parents had the mental energy to decide what to do with them. My father was quite particular about the tidying process, repeatedly telling me to stick to my side. I'd never been allowed in the attic as a child, and I hardly seemed welcome there as an adult, but Mum had apparently forced him to ask me for help. His back was playing up, so he'd been struggling to carry boxes on his own. Anyhow, I insisted that I would follow Dad's rules, which made him soften a little. He conceded that I'd never disobeyed him before, so he'd trust me. And then came the second most frightening situation of my young life. Whilst we were moving clutter into the loft, my father clutched his chest with fingers bent angularly. "Dad?" I gasped. Most oddly of all, my father, legs buckling, seemed concerned only with the cardboard boxes at the side of the room. He tried to shove one in particular off the top of the stack, but both the box tower and his brittle body came tumbling down to the floorboards. I dropped to my knees beside him, then twisted my head to the open attic door. "Mum, help!" A few seconds later, my mother, calling out for an explanation, came flying up the attic ladder. She wailed in horror at the sight of her husband lying half-conscious on the attic floor. Mum hurriedly rang 9999, then beckoned me towards her. "Come on, Charlie, get out of the attic." I frowned, eyeing Dad below me. "What? One of us needs to stay with him." "Charlie, I won't tell you," Mum began. Then a voice came from her phone, and she started to descend the ladder. "Yes, it's my husband. He's—" As she talked to the operator, I found myself focusing on something other than the man lying at my knees, teetering on the precipice of a cardiac arrest. Rather, I was focusing on my parents' odd behavior. Dad had knocked the boxes over intentionally. Mum hadn't wanted me to stay in the attic. Something was up. "Charlie." Dad wheezed after I'd climbed to my feet and walked towards the toppled box with a sealed lid that he'd been trying to hide. I held up a hand. "Don't move. Mum's calling an ambulance." "Don't," he croaked, exerting whatever strength he had left. But every protest only motivated me further. I knelt before the unlabeled box, held together with sellotape robbed of adhesiveness. By time, then I tore the flaps open with ease. Inside were discolored sheets of paper, coated in orange, mildew, mold, and ink. The sheets were made of fibers that felt like painful bristles to the touch, as if they might draw blood or burrow beneath my flesh, a horrifyingly inexplicable sensation that now I do not believe to have been imaginary. Those handwritten documents told a story that sickened me. Adam Darren, 10/02/2005, blessed be. £11, blessed be Adam. Smiles for the crescent moon. He is ripe for harvest, blessed be. He shall end the world of men. He shall lead the chosen few, blessed be. The poetic ramblings meant little to me, but the date of birth certainly didn't. The 10th of February, 2005. My birthday. My father painfully pleaded, "Don't touch them. Please." I found an old Polaroid at the bottom of the box, displaying dozens of people standing in a field on a sunny day. A timid moon hung above, half hidden by the blue of the sky. There was nothing immediately odd about the people. They wore ordinary clothes, denims and cottons. At the front, a blonde-haired couple held a blue bundle between them, a towel cushioning a newborn baby, his cherub face peeking out. And a few feet to the side of them, wearing smiles tinged with falseness and fear, were two adults that caught my eye. 20 years younger, but instantly recognizable. Mum and Dad. "Stop touching them, Charlie," Dad begged, and I turned to see him reaching towards me painfully. "They'll have found us by now." "The ambulance is on its way," Mum called as she hurried back up the attic ladder. And when she saw the relics in my hands, her eyes widened. In a demanding tone, I asked her, "What are these?" "You touched them," she whispered, eyes flitting to the attic window fearfully. "Who is this child?" I growled, jabbing at the picture. "Why are you and Dad in this picture?" "We should have burnt that box," Mum whimpered as she walked over to me. "Maybe it's not too late." "No!" Dad weakly protested, choking on the word. Mum knelt beside him and took his hand. "The operator said we need to get you into a comfortable—" "Don't destroy any of it," Dad pleaded, ignoring his wife's pleas. "That'll only make it worse. We have to run. We have to—" "Are these my real parents?" I interrupted, cheeks red with rage, pointing at the baby in the photo. "Am I Adam?" My mum averted my gaze, answering me without saying a word. As my fingers gripped the Polaroid's plastic coating, I heard voices pouring out of the picture. Jubilant voices. Though nothing about their joy put me at ease. It haunted me. Haunted. Me because it felt as if I were bound to a force, both internal and external, unlike any earthly thing I have ever experienced. Horrified by this sensation, I dropped the contents of the box, and my parents let out a collective sigh of relief. But then my free-willed feet carried the rest of my body over to the attic window. Standing at the other side of the road was a man in a parka. Just a man. An ordinary man. But he was eyeballing me, looking straight up at the window. He mouthed a word at me. I don't know how to read lips, but I'm certain of what he said. Ripe. He began to sprint towards our front door, a shoe sole pummeled against the front door 2 floors below, and my questions no longer mattered. All that mattered was the very primitive and pressing urge in my head to escape, to survive. And upon hearing the sound of the intruder, my parents shared a knowing look before screaming in unison, "Run!" Terrified beyond words, I slid down the ladder, leaving my sobbing mother and weak father behind. I scurried into my old bedroom, tuning out the sound of wood tearing from hinges downstairs. Feet pounded across the lobby. I tore open the bedroom window and eyed the branch of the oak tree a couple of feet away. As the stranger came upstairs, and my heart pounded against my ribcage, I took a deep breath. Then, for the first time since my reckless youth, I jumped. A cry of frustration came from behind me as I clumsily caught the thick branch like a monkey bar. After scaling down the tree, I looked up in terror to see that man standing in the window, fingers clutching the edge of the frame. He had been a moment from snatching me. I fled as an ambulance siren filled the street. For the past day, I've been hopping from bus to bus. I haven't slept. I'm too afraid to contact my parents. But now that I've put some distance between myself and that horrifying photograph, which seemed to call out to a frightful force I do not understand, I'm starting to see a little more clearly. Yesterday, I needed only to escape. Now, I need answers. Who am I, and who are the people watching me? Perhaps not the exact demonic being from Christian eschatology, given that my story concerns neither heaven nor hell, neither God nor the devil. Still, I don't know a better word to describe me. Regardless of my cult's specific religious ideology, the fact of the matter remains that I was born with a godless purpose. Much like Lucifer himself, I was conceived to bring about the end of mankind. On Tuesday, after a sleepless night and a day of bus hopping from city to city, I eventually wandered into a library, hoping that I'd put enough distance between myself and that home intruder. My chest still fluttered with adrenaline. I'd not felt terror like that since Miss Black nearly stole me from the world as a boy, and I believed my father that touching the photograph and those documents had been the gateway to those people. I didn't believe in the supernatural until I felt it for myself, a force beyond earthly explanation. I don't know how to describe the sensation, but I felt those people, the ones who made me. I saw them, and they saw me, and I knew I had to do whatever possible to stop them from finding me again. Using a library computer, I reached out on Reddit and other online forums, asking for information as to the identities of these people. I expected it to be difficult to find answers about a cult of, judging by the photograph, only 50 people. But I learnt that I was dealing with something bigger than that. This cult is named the Old Collective. It is a community of folk who have long practiced occult rituals, all in the name of saving humanity. Their goal has long been to kill the many and save the few, not for the sake of preserving the planet, but for building a new status quo, building a dark and brutish wasteland with them and their god of flesh as its ruler. All they have ever needed to carry out their unholy plan is a vessel to become their god of flesh. And worst of all, I learnt that this cult numbers in the thousands, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of members across the world. This opened up an entirely new compartment of fear in my chest. You see, at first, I imagined that the home intruder had walked through some spectral gateway to reach my location within a matter of mere minutes. The reality, however, was perhaps worse. He'd simply been nearby. This cult is so large and so pervasive in global civilization that these monsters are everywhere. You live near these people. They walk among you, in your city, your town, your village. People who want to end you and everything you love. I realized as I sat in the middle of that library with teary eyes surveying my surroundings fearfully, that there wasn't a bus in the world that could take me away from them. Nowhere was safe. I had to find a way to make myself safe. I eventually stumbled across a private Discord server titled XI concerning matters of the occult. The conversation quickly took quite a turn. Me, how do I contact my parents safely? Yell 10. Don't. Me. But I need to find out whether they made it to the hospital. Yell 10. If they're still alive, it's only because the old collective has allowed it. Perhaps to draw you back there. Blue Man. Yell 10 is right. You cannot trust anybody. These people have spent 20 years searching for you and they'll never give up. They'll try to bait you somewhere. Don't stay in any one place for too long. Me. My father still didn't fully explain how they found us the first time. Yell 10. Those papers and that photo were spiritual instruments imbued with a spiritual link between you and the old collective. One touch allows you to see them and them to see you. It's a bridge of the mind, of the spirit, of the soul. Me. But they won't find me now, right? Without those spiritual instruments. Blue Man. You can't outrun this, Adam. Me. Please don't call me that. I'm Charlie. Yell 10. You sound like one of them, Blue Man. Same right back at you, asshole. Yell 10. Are you keeping safe, Charlie? Me. Sure. I'm using a public computer rather than my phone, though I know these people use rituals and old magic to search for me, Blue Man. That doesn't mean they can't find you through technology, too. I'd leave that library right now if I were you. Another ominous message. I found myself agreeing with Yell 10. It seemed like this Blue Man almost admired the old collective. Then I received a private message. Yell 10. I don't often advocate doxing, but if somebody had the technological wherewithal to uncover the location of, say, a certain Blue Man, then that somebody might provide you with this. Below this message was the shared Google location, just outside Paris, of a phone belonging to a man whose identity I won't share here. Me. Why the fuck would you give me this? Yell 10. If he's with the old collective, and you get the jump on him, you'll get answers. I didn't know how I found agreeing to something so ludicrous, but I got up from the chair in the library and hurriedly made my way out, head pounding, painfully. I also don't know how I so easily convinced myself to pour a hefty chunk of my student loan into a plane ticket, of all things, in the middle of the week. Then again, I had more to fear than missing lectures and assignments. I still wanted to believe the whole ordeal to be in my head, my aching head. Wanted to believe I hadn't seen or felt a thing whilst holding that photograph and those pieces of paper. That there had been no intruder in our home. That Mum and Dad were sitting in a hospital somewhere, wondering why their son had vanished for 24 hours. But I knew better. I felt the prick when I touched that first document. Not a paper. Cut. But some living thing within the paper. And I saw people standing in all parts of the world, watching and smiling at me. It was no dizzy spell that took hold of me. Moreover, when I arrived in Paris late on Tuesday evening, I realized I was making a grave mistake. Yet that didn't stop me. Didn't convince me to cancel the Uber to Blue Man's apartment building. Didn't convince me to get off the pavement, from which I stood and eyeballed the large limestone structure towering 4 stories above. Me. Didn't convince me to run when the hairs on the back of my neck stood to attention. Then came a brutish hand around my neck, and it clamped firmly against my mouth. I unleashed a terrified screech, pleading for my life, as I was dragged into an alleyway opposite the apartment building. And I decided that this must be it, the terrifying end to my short-lived quest for answers. I sobbed and shrieked and begged for mercy in a muffled voice, all while attempting and failing to come to terms with the seeming inevitability of my oncoming demise. "Quiet," hissed my assailant in a French accent. "I will let my hand go, Mr. Charlie, but you must stop, please. I'm not with them. I'm not—" My eyes broadened as I realized it was him, Blue Man. I elbowed the man, propelling myself forwards, then spun around with fists raised, and he held his hands up defensively. "You shouldn't have come here," he said in a breathy voice. "They tricked you. They're already in your head. You can feel them squirming around in there, can't you?" I gulped, trying to ignore the pounding sensation in my skull. Who the fuck are you? We have to get away from here. Blumen pleaded in a whisper. There's someone in my apartment, 3rd floor. They used me as bait to find you. I looked up at the 3rd floor, following Blumen's shaky finger to a row of lit windows. Figures walked past the glass panes, searching for the Frenchman who had escaped, and seemingly waited for me to show. Waited to apprehend me before the old collective could do so. I believed him. Call it my 6th sense. Just like my sense that, as Blumen had said, these people had wormed their way into my brain. Ever since I touched the things in that box, and the thought of them rummaging around up there, much as they were rummaging through Blumen's apartment, filled me with deep, unyielding horror. When I snapped back into reality, I realized that I was still staring at the lit windows of Blumen's apartment, but all movement had stopped behind the glass panes. There were 3 silhouettes standing and looking out at the night, looking out at us. Blumen and I jolted on the spot as the lights in the apartment suddenly cut out. They're coming, he murmured, backing down the alley. Come on, we've got to go. We both turned to flee, but stopped immediately in our tracks. The dark outlines of heads were visible at the far end of the alley, men and women obstructing our path. Shit, Blumen whispered, turning back to the main road. Okay, we'll go this. The man grabbed hold of my arm, just below the sleeve of my white tee, and unleashed an almighty scream, the most horrific scream I have ever heard. It was something beyond human, for he suffered a pain no human should suffer. And as he recoiled from me, it was my turn to scream in horror, for Blumen's skin bore cracks that were spreading across his flesh, painting his arms, then his cheeks, and presumably his entire body. And in a swift act of what I choose to see as mercy, all was over in a matter of seconds. Bubbling blood, emitting steam, poured through the wounds, red-hot blood spilling out of a body boiling alive. And then, like a glass cracking from thermal stress, Blue Man's entire form shattered spontaneously, reducing him to a pool of indistinguishable mush on the floor. Since touching the things in that box, something had awoken within me, something that made me an abomination to the touch, the ender of humanity. I wailed, stumbling into the street, as the horrifying figures from the alley and Blumen's apartment building began to surround me. I shivered, terrified beyond words, in the center of the road as I prepared to meet my end. And then came a brilliant burst of thought, whether internal or external, I do not care. But as the connection between the old collective and me strengthened, and I had visions of the many thousands of followers across the world, an ingenious idea struck me. An idea struck by the hellish end to which Blumen had just succumbed. When those people and I were connecting like that, whether in our minds or some spiritual realm, it was almost like touching Blumen. And as I had terrifying visions of those many nightmarish figures across the world, searching for me, intending to use me for awful and unspeakable things, I decided to let them reach out, to let them touch me through that spiritual plane. In fact, I begged them to do so, and they foolishly did. Then came the screams of those dozens of monsters surrounding me in the street, moments away from getting their greedy mitts on me. I don't know whether they'd even thought about the situation in their collective delirium, thought about what had just happened to Blumen. A mere touch of my skin, and his blood had boiled, had poured through opening fissures in his skin, and now the same fate was befalling each of them. It might have befallen others across the world. I don't know how far it reached. All I know is that I felt them reaching out in my mind, and something within me reached back. Something dark that they put inside me. And that is what I fear most. Even now, after fleeing France and putting distance between myself and that awful cult, I realize that I cannot run. Even if I were to end every last cult member on Earth, I wouldn't be killing the true evil that hunts me, has hunted me since my birth. After all, I put an end to them, but not to myself, not to the thing inside me. I have no control over any of this. It was all planned out for me, and I am as much a victim as any of you. I was created to end the world. Will I stop here?